Boom, 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 boom.
Welcome to the Good Energy Project with Lou Connor, a surprisingly hopeful show about the invisible economic forces that shape our lives, our homes, and our future on planet Earth.
Press it. Press go. Okay. I'm ready for the tour.
You're ready for the tour?
Yeah.
Kia ora. Well, first of all, no mai haere mai ki tēnei whare o te whānau a tāpihana. O ngā uri o Hinea Tūrama, he kuia tāwhito o Hinea Tūrama is actually the inspiration for this house.
Oh, there's a picture of her here.
Yeah, that's a picture of her painted by Joseph Jenner Merritt in 1842 at Whakatane. And
Standing by the water with the, what do you call the?
kākahu or korowai. And in the background is a picture of what today we call Whale Island, but that's where she used to live with her husband, old man Tapsell. So when you drove in, there was Tapsell Road and Tūrama Street, or Tūrama Road. So this is the part of that estate.
And she's Tūrama.
And she's Hinea Tūrama.
Hinea Tūrama.
And the land we're standing on is called Te Whatetiri Pata Ihi, or Te Whatetiri, thunder, pata, thunderclap, and ihi, to give a shiver down your spine.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And it's called that because back in former days when we had kumara gardens here, and there've been kumara gardens on and off for 16 generations in the whānau, when the big thunderheads would form over the mountain out here, Nongataha, the warm air that's coming off the volcanic plateau, meeting the cool air off the ocean, and around about late summer, early autumn, those big thunderclaps would be heard.
Oh, wow.
And that was a signal for harvesting.
Oh, cool.
And so that's how the land here got its name,
Cool.
harvesting.
And are there any kumara still here?
No. So our kumara gardens, thank you to potato and colonisation, it used to take so much energy to grow kumara and to do it properly. And so the planting and growing season was controlled by, you could say, the male tohua, the specialist, male gardener specialist. That harvest time, everyone harvested. And it's quite a process. And then the kumara then was all brought back to the marae. And our marae was actually on Kawaha Point. It's about 400 metres away from where we are now. And that's where the kumara pits, and from that point, the men literally passed the kumara over to the women. And the women's job is to look after the kumara through the winter months, to feed the people, to distribute it for hosting, feasting, sustenance. Sometimes it was dried, it was all sorts of things done with kumara. And then in the spring, the seed kumara were then presented by the women back to the men for the planting ceremony, which was a male-only process. So our economy ran on the kumara. The whole of our economy is kumara-based up until colonisation.
Particular to this area?
Actually, the whole country, all of the different tribal groups all had a kumara economy, because without the kumara, you couldn't stay in one place. The kumara gave you the carbohydrate,
Oh, that's so interesting.
food substance that you needed for us, and it meant you didn't have to wander around.
Yeah. I've got some questions over there.
Yeah, okay.
I've written a little introduction for me to read out. Do you mind if we do that?
That's fine.
Do you want
No, I'm at your service. Whatever you want.
So I'll just read this out.
Okay.
And then I've got a few questions. At the start of this year, I was feeling unsure about where to take this project next, when I picked up a book called Kāinga, People, Land, Belonging, by Paul Tapsell, from Te Arawa and Tainui. I sat down and read it all day. I was enchanted by Paul's descriptions of pre-colonial kāinga, the villages which were the centre of life for Māori before they were disrupted by colonisation, Paul described how generations of Māori gathered knowledge of the land, rivers, and ecosystems where they lived and maintained an intricate web of relationships between people, other life forms, and gods. This knowledge surpassed Western science in its ability to understand complex ecosystems and keep them in balance. It was encoded into stories and songs, ritualized and held in taonga that were kept in particular places in the landscape. Kāinga were the anchors that connected people with this vast network of knowledge and relationships. It was through their relationship with their kāinga that pre-colonial Māori belonged to the whenua and maintained a balance with it. Paul went on to describe how kāinga was systematically undermined and disempowered through the process of colonisation, and how Māori are living with the consequences of that today. His vision is to re-centre and re-empower kāinga and to heal the historical injustices that led to their decline. When I read the book, I thought, this is a vision I want to get behind. I'm very excited to be sitting with Paul now and have the opportunity to talk. We're in his ancestral home in Tapsell Road, Rotorua. And he's just flown in from Christchurch, where he lives with his family, and I've driven down from Auckland. In my last few interviews, I've been exploring how Pākehā and tau iwi New Zealanders find a sense of home, belonging, and purpose in Aotearoa. And I'm excited to explore how we can work together to support this movement to re-empower and re-centre kāinga. I'd like to find out what's in the way and to explore what kāinga could look like in our multicultural technological society. What can we learn from this rich heritage, and what can we create together in the muck of colonisation? Kia ora, Paul.
Kia ora. Okay.
That was my little introduction, but
Well, thank you. Very flattering.
Is it?
Yeah, I am actually quite humbled to hear what you just said. Yeah, because when you write something like this, in a way, you don't know who your audience is going to be. You're trying to imagine who it's going to be, and you really want to reach out across this cultural divide that we pretend doesn't exist in New Zealand, but it's about as wide as the Grand Canyon sometimes, and you have to go all the way down to the bottom to get back up the other side. So I'm hoping what I wrote would act as a bridge and find a way that we can understand each other. And what I was finding in the literature that was available and what I've grown up with and gone through university with, very little was written from a Māori perspective, looking from the inside back out to where our settler communities, the Pākehā, find themselves, but they have been in parallel cut off and separated from the original narratives of colonisation and how it occurred. And for Māori, it's the same, because the majority of Māori growing up in cities, and they've been disconnected from that narrative as well. So I want to write something where not necessarily providing the narrative of their own tribal trajectory, but how colonisation has, on one hand, dispossessed 780 communities of their economic base, and on the other hand, a incoming settler community from Great Britain has come into controlling that economic base, but are living in what my academic mentor used to call historic amnesia. So I think that part of the answer to a future solution is not just knowledge, but understanding how that knowledge has been used to manifest a nation we call New Zealand today, and manipulated and obfuscated or repurposed to create this narrative being bicultural, apart from a few stirrers, harmony type society. So it wasn't.
So were you hoping to, you said bridging the divide, were you sort of aiming for a Māori audience and Pākehā audience?
Exactly, both, because I think it's both ways. Māori don't know how they got here, but their ancestors have gone through trauma through colonisation. And like my great-great-grandmother there, she was bayoneted by the British at the Battle of Rotorua. And then you've got the Pākehā soldiers, the British soldiers, that then got land as reward for her and 150 of her people's been killed there in the
yeah.
pā of Orako. They're rewarded with land.
Yeah.
And then 5 generations later, you talk to their kids
Mm.
at university, and they're totally unaware of how that land transaction occurred and the blood that was shed for it to occur. What worries me is we're talking about having to bring out the history of New Zealand, the proper history of these battles, but we're still romanticising that in a way. Again, it's like the Te Papa indoctrination of you're either Māori or you're Pākehā, and if you're Māori, it's romanticised. But today, being Māori, and you live in urban areas, and we're quite happy for you to have an ethnic identity of kapahaka and you can speak the reo. But what about your great-grandparents who grew up in these kāinga, these villages, 780 odd across the country, and they sent their kids to schools and universities to learn how the colonizer works.
And then bring it back.
But what's happened is it hasn't come back. And the kāinga now are right on the precipice of collapse.
In the book, I get the sense that you feel like it might be the last moment to retain some of...
I think it's like climate change. We're hitting tipping points, and I think the kāinga are hitting a tipping point. But I'm optimistic. So one of the kāinga I'm working with at the moment, and it's probably the most impoverished of all kāinga in the country.
Which one is that?
And that's the kāinga of Te Rere Atu Kāhea, just outside Katikati. Like literally only about 2 kilometres in a straight line. But until recently, the lower part of that community had no running water, no electricity, and no sewage. And now, when they have a king tide and a depression hits at the same time, low pressure system, they've got water running through their living rooms. And they've lived there since 1869, when they were forcibly taken off the wider whenua that they've been part of for generations, 60,000 hectares to live in this reservation. And then they watched as all the settlers came in, took control of that land.
And you said that the land was just divided up and given out and wasn't even paid for.
If anyone drives through Katikati, go into the museum, and it actually shows how the lands were subdivided by a person called Stewart, and then each of those lands had a lot number. And then each of the people came off this particular boat, I've forgotten the name of it, they were given a number, and then these kids pulled out of a marble 2 bags. One was the land numbers and the other one the people numbers. 2 numbers were pulled out, and that's how they got the land. So there was no money exchanged. And so that community's grown up thinking that the Māori didn't want the land, and they have no idea why they're all just living down in the squalor at the bottom, right at sea level, vulnerable to climate change. And meanwhile, up on the hill, you've got all these wealthy multi-billions of dollars been made just out of rating and taxes, let alone out of the primary industry of growing kiwi fruit and avocados and dairy, beef, sheep, cattle.
I think in your book you said you visited a friend of your wife's.
Yes.
Who was, can you tell that story?
Oh, bless her. So we were visiting, it was down Whakatane, so another area of confiscation. And I was sitting around the kitchen table with her while my wife and her friend, they were off picking strawberries. They owned a big strawberry farm. And we started talking about Māori land and confiscation and everything. And she started to give probably a very typical redneck response. Maoris didn't want it, and they didn't know how to look after the land, and look what we've done with production. We've added to the New Zealand economy, blah blah blah. And then she's looking at me, and she's looking at my face. She goes, "You're not Maori, are you?" And she goes, "No, you don't look Maori. You can't be Maori." She goes, "Oh, what's your last name?" I go, "Tapsell." "Oh, you're definitely Maori." It's like.
She must have.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, Uncle Peter was Speaker of the House, and so he had that Maori profile on that family.
A few steps back then.
Yeah, she did. She stepped back rapidly, and then she said, "Oh, well, you're one of the good Maoris," or something like that. It's like.
Yeah, because that'll help.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And it's hilarious because literally some of our relations live probably about a kilometre away at Ngāti Pūtiko. Yeah, it's like totally, you might as well be living in England, one hand, and the other one. That's just a big divide. So you have these cultural divides occur. I think the motivation at the moment, which has been played into by our political system, is one of fear and creating fear. Right back to when we saw Brash do it back in the mid-2000s, this has re-emerged.
And you were saying about the head of the Herald.
Oh, yeah, that's just that latest, the Herald article, I think, something to do with Hobson's choice, and they did a big advertisement cover around the newspaper, just talking about Māori taking our land. And it reminds me of the exhibition we did at the Auckland Museum way back when, which was called Scars on the, and I think our byline was on it, who stole whose land? And it's, again, that was an attempt by the Auckland Museum to awaken an awareness of the history that sits beneath our colonial harmony of contentment between the races. Yeah.
I loved in your book when you talked about being a young boy and sitting on the knees of your elders and hearing their descriptions. And I wondered if you could give a sense of that world they described.
It gives me goosebumps even you asking me this question now, because when they talked about this, you might be sitting around the fire or something, and especially the old house we had in the fire was where everything happened. They would talk about it like they were living it, literally. And I think from that young age, the concept of tangata, whenua, it really is about how they both are linked together really tightly. We aren't tangata without the whenua. The whenua is not whenua without the tangata, because they need each other in a reciprocal relationship of management and maintaining what we call mauri, the energy equilibrium that maintains the essence, the ecology. And I was speaking to Professor Russell Death only last week, and we were having an email discussion, and he said the closest I can get to in his mind to what mauri is about from a Māori world, but in the Pākehā world of science, is ecology, because you cannot describe ecology as just being one thing or another. It's a whole system of the environment, and the people are part of the environment. Yet, since Descartes, I suppose, we've separated ourselves from the system, man being the deity has control over nature, there to sustain man. And being in the museum industry since very young, you see this recurring theme. Even if you go to the Auckland Museum, they still have a whole like big floor called
section
and the floor's called Natural History. And the British Museum, or you go to the Field Museum, Natural History.
Well, they've even got separate museums for
the Museum of Ethnography or Ethnology. That. But what's interesting, when you go back to the Field Museum, Natural History has the native in it. So it's kind of like, so you get this native, indigenous plants, indigenous people. Irony is, when I look at it from today, 21st century, and look back, I think actually the museums were closer to, without realising it, to actually how it works. They are part of the land, but in a very civilised way, not in a... Yeah, so I find that juxtaposition today really fascinating.
So what was the feeling of, learning from your elders? What was the feeling of that way of being?
At the time, I was just a precocious young kid that asked hundreds of questions and trying to understand, and then they'd fill me with these ideas, and I go off in the bush and find them, and they'd talk about, up in this bush up here, this is why it's called Fairy Springs, because the Pataparai had people lived up there, and we could see in the morning their steam coming from the fires, and they say, don't go up there during the night time, they're going to get you.
So it was a sort of like a really mythical world.
Yeah, so in my mind I had this sort of whole magic thing about in the forest, and for me it was exciting. But for my dad, it was like absolute fear, because he came from the ocean. He was an ocean person.
Yeah.
And when he used to come and stay at his uncle up in the Mamaku village, back before the forests were completely cut down, he'd sit on the back doorstep of his uncle's place, and he said it was just like this massive wall of trees and darkness, and he said he was too scared to go into it.
Oh, yeah.
Back when he was a kid. And I
But you
remember,
must have been enchanted.
well, anything he said he's scared of, I'm going to go find out. It's like I've always gone where he hasn't. And then I'd drag him along, come on. So eventually when I learnt about all the places up in the Mamaku up here, then drag Dad along and we'd go into the bush. And I've got a wonderful photo somewhere of Dad standing in front of this old rimu stump. There was a tree that had fallen down probably 100 years ago. But it was literally from that window there all the way to the end. That's how wide this stump.
What's that, like 5 meters wide?
Yeah, 5 meter. And then we started walking along from there. You couldn't see the canopy, you couldn't see the tops of the rimu trees. So massive. And this is the last part of 600,000 acres of forest that hasn't been felled. All around that it's pasture.
Almost like a metaphor for the kāinga being the last of something. Before you talked about your habit of really delving into what the problem is and it becoming very dark and really facing up to that and then looking for the little spots of light.
Oh yeah, you problematize everything
Yeah.
to the point of almost depression.
Yeah.
and you're just surrounded by this darkness, and then you step back and you see where the pricks of light are still coming through. Just these little pinpricks, and then you like going down a tunnel.
Yeah.
You chase that light and see where it takes you.
Yeah.
And
So what are the pinpricks?
so in this case, the work I did that was before this occurred was finding the Burke brothers. There's John and his brother Rick, and they were these two Pākehā surfers from Raglan that married these two daughters of the same dad, and they ended up inheriting their father-in-law's farm, and he had bought the land right up into the Kaimai because of his love for the ecology and understanding the forests.
And they're Pākehā.
Yeah, they were Pākehā, and the boys loved it.
Yeah.
And they ended up taking over the land. And even after the divorces all occurred, they still run the farms.
So they divorced from their two sisters?
Yeah, I think they've broken up, got new partnerships and everything, but they became the land, and I think they're obviously amicable with the whole family. But from way back then, their father-in-law, they've worked with him and started building riparians, not just the riparians that have been decreed as wide enough by government mandate, but rather 10 meters each side of the waterways, so that no soil's lost into the waterways, and then the water that's coming down stays clear and clean during the biggest rainfalls, like what we've had this morning. Then you've got the birds start to continue the riparian building. So you've got the birds of the cedars, and then you get a really, like what we've done here on this property, the birds actually create a ecology that's in balance, because the birds are part of the ecology. And same thing up there. And looking at what they were doing, and they were doing it exactly on the same river system, that at the bottom of the river system is this most depressed kāinga community in economic hardship. So it was like, okay, so how do we bring this community back up the river to the wealth and ecological terms being created by these two Pākehā brothers who are down their late 60s.
Yeah.
And their love for the land is also an understanding now of how critical it is for that community to re-engage, to carry it on into the future beyond land title.
Yeah.
So the balance is, how do we let this community down here have skin in the game when everything was confiscated from them in the 1860s?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking with them about.
Yeah.
Like,
and is that the little prick of light? Like, what's the hope there?
I think what it's showing is that I think most reasonable non-Maori citizens of this country, if they understand the history, are more likely to respond proactively and create that bridge across the canyon and meet halfway. And then on the other hand, if Māori feel they can actually be included and be part of an economy that's not just based out of a post-settlement governance entity, but is based out of engagement with local community, local councils, regional council, and can be seen as adding value to the landscape and to the economic output. And you think for every Māori that's not on the dole and not in gangs and creating all the trouble they might be creating, like around Katika is terrible for that, that's a positive for the economy right there. And then if they're allowed to activate the whole entrepreneurial innovation, because Māori are really innovative, given a chance. I mean, you know, kid going through metalwork at school makes a pea pipe, right? But it's like, they've innovated something, it's like for their own cause, a present, it's like, well, given the opportunity, Māori, what's happened is they've been excluded through our colonisation process. And then to maintain that exclusion, the Pākehā communities have been indoctrinated with Māori being second class, lazy. If we give the land, they'll just waste it or whatever else. And why should we give it to them? We've worked this land hard. And if it wasn't for us Pākehās and being the backbone of this nation, farming, primary industry, New Zealand would be still in the back blocks. And yet if we go back to 1840 when the treaty was signed, the economic power of the tribes of this country was phenomenal on a worldwide scale. Their GDP per capita way outstripped what we're doing today in New Zealand. And that was based out of exports to Australia, to the gold fields. So it shows our capability and our leadership. Like even Hongi Hika is a great example of demonising an ancestor and to make him look like he was a bloodthirsty warlord that attacked all the different tribes around the country. But if you start to actually read deep into all his narratives, and there's so much written on him that's been hidden from view, you find this guy was so strategic. And it wasn't about killing people, it was about getting labour to go and work all the potato fields for export to bring in the economy. And some of, like my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother, they met working up in the north. So the story goes that they actually met each other up there working.
And that was potatoes.
That was potatoes, and then there was the gum industry as well. And so they as young people, they're up there making money and bringing money back here to the kāinga here.
Because I'm interested, when you described pre-colonial economies, because I've been looking at economics as energy flows, and I was really interested in tuku and utu and the sort of balancing the Māori through exchanges, and that seemed to be kind of like almost a basis of an economic system as well.
Oh, definitely. It was Raymond Firth's Economics of the Māori very much touches on that process. And tuku was agreements made between leaders, and part of the tuku was the taonga. And taonga, the best way to describe taonga is it's a resource. Whether it's a resource of knowledge or a resource of food or a resource of production, timber, whatever. So that taonga could be applied to a harbour of flounder, or it could be applied to a hot pool, which gave you geothermal energy, or it could be applied to something you put around your neck. But it was treasured. It had been tuku'd by your ancestors to protect and to pass on to future generations. And every once in a while, the tuku could also extend to a marriage with another tribe. And so you're giving rights to land access, but no one owned the land. And that's what you're talking about, is an economy of belonging, not an economy of ownership. And that's where you get this whole separation occurring. So when you go into the ownership space, and Māori are just as bad as Pākehā at this, what's mine's mine, I'm entitled to it, and I have the whakapapa, and who are you to come along now? I'm senior. And then on the Pākehā side, it's like, I've got legal title to this, I'm the landlord, I'm the lord of this land, but don't ask me how I got it, because it was from a sale of this person. When you trace back the sales, it comes back to that same old story. Inappropriate acquisition, rather than say stolen or theft. Auckland's a great example where you have Hobson turns up, he's given the opportunity to set up a city capital of New Zealand, in Auckland, and Ngāti Whātua tuku him. Rangatira ta rangatira.
He can use that land to...
Use that land, so I've seen that, yeah. And it's a quid pro quo, but not, I've given this to you, now you can go sell it and then use us as your labourers. Same thing with the township here, same agreement. And it was one about equality and sharing of resources for benefit of both peoples. So you've had one people have benefited massively and the other people at their detriment. And so they do cover in the book is how that colonisation process effectively works. It's through immigration, mass immigration.
Right, yeah.
And then you get the balance of numbers from 1840, there's about 2,000 European British settler community. The treaty was signed, Te Tiriti was signed because it offered free passport into Australia with their goods at the height of their trade and industry at that time. And then from 1840 to 1860, you see this massive population growth at that time, started to go exponential to 60,000 European British in the country, matching the declining Māori population due to diseases and warfare and everything else that was going on. And they've come down to 60,000. And there's the tipping point. And that's when the British now openly attack the hinterland production.
The numbers.
Yeah.
They're sort of winning on numbers.
Yeah, and they've got a big bank loan from England.
So they can quit the story.
Yeah, quit the pretense.
And then just get on with the takeover.
And you've read the AJHRs around 1880s by the time the wars had finished. And it's just so derogatory and so racist what they're saying openly.
There was a quote in your book by the Justice Minister or something.
Justice Ward, I think, was the word, or Searle, one of those
Searle.
characters.
Yeah, the Crown introduced a new mechanism for raupatu via its 1865 Native Lands Act. One of the court's key proponents, Justice Minister Henry Sewell, later said it had two aims, one of which was to bring the bulk of the lands in the Northern Island, which belonged to the natives, within the reach of colonisation. The other great object was the detribalisation of the natives, to destroy, if it were possible, the principle of communism, which ran through the whole of their institutions, upon which their social system was based, and which stood as a barrier in the way of all attempts to amalgamate the native race into our own social and political system. I was just like, whoa. I sort of couldn't believe that they actually said it.
Yeah. And that's just one of many.
Yeah.
But that to me was a really important passage because it showed right there the thinking of the majority of the political leadership.
Yeah.
And that manifesto of colonisation, how critical and important it was.
Yeah.
And also you're looking at the majority, if not all of those who had come to New Zealand to start again from England came from a background of majority came from a background of never owning land before. And here they've been offered the opportunity to become landlords or lords over their own land in the same way that they've been subjected to as proletariats back in England. So now they could become lords. And then a generation later, they want to then show and prove themselves back to England. And so you get this massive participation of New Zealand's second generation British, still carrying British passports, still seeing themselves as British, going back to the big expos over there, the expositions, and showing off their primary agricultural expertise back to England and demanding recognition in that way. And,
it all seems to speak to trauma to me. You wouldn't do that unless you're,
I reckon,
really insecure.
Yeah, and so they've overcompensated, and And if not for those pesky natives that they kept, well, and that goes back to the New Zealand company, where they very much saw that if you took the land away from Māori, then they can become labourers for you and help rebuild the colony. So Wakefield knew that. He knew exactly what he was doing.
I've just learnt about this book, Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici, and it talks about how for the capitalist project to succeed, they needed labour and they needed resources, and that was what colonisation was about. It was a necessary step for capitalism to succeed.
And I mean, this leads me on to a couple of thoughts. One is that what Oliver Cromwell started 3-4 generations later, and it came to its zenith, where you look at the process of New Zealand's colonisation. And the other thing is, like, all the monuments that we had built to these British second sons or whomever, and all the different landscapes renamed after Earls of Egmont or whomever else. And then it was about 5 years ago, you had that backlash against the monuments. I think Tamaiti gave the best solution. I think it was fantastic. Instead of just taking the monument down and erasing that history, let's create a museum of monuments. Let's get all of the different and put them all there, and then we can go and see their story and understand from where they came and then how it ended up that Hamilton got called Hamilton, or Cromwell down in Central Otago got the name after Oliver Cromwell. So you start to see colonisation has been practiced for about 300 years before it arrives in New Zealand. And
so going quite good at it by then.
Going right back to Ireland, and that's why I think my grandmother so enjoyed being on the Māori side of the equation, because she came from families that literally lost their land and ended up having to live in London and then found their way onto boats that got them out to New Zealand. They were the butt of the English, but they worked their ass off working shipbuilding, masonry, plastering, whatever, and helped build Auckland as tradespeople. And then eventually today, that side of my grandmother's family owns half of the Auckland waterfront. But we're the black sheep because my grandmother ran away and married a native. So it's quite funny.
What do you think we can do to support this re-empowerment of kāinga?
I think we're on the right track right now with the education. And I remember my old people, maybe that's why they picked on me, they said, don't waste your time with your own generation. Start with the children. I think.
Oh, like you were a little boy and your elders' arms, and then you're spending time with them because you've got children.
Yes.
Can you tell me about the project you're doing, looking at how children are connecting with their ancestral kāinga?
Really fortunate to be funded by Marsden Royal Society. And they provided Merita and I the opportunity in crucial Wātene and
Merita is your
wife, mother of my children. And we surveyed a whole lot of high schools from all around the country. And the idea was we're running a hypothesis that second, third generation children growing up in urban areas, Māori children, actually really want to reconnect back to their marae. But it was all anecdotal, so we said, well, let's test this and let's find out what's going on and ask them questions that will be able to bring out as much information as possible. And so, short answer is yes, definitely, where they can. The importance of being in a city where you're a long way away from your marae is that the local marae provides a service for the local schools to start to act as a bridge, a takawainga, to help them reconnect. This other part of it is something that I've been doing now since 2008, is building Māori maps so that you can actually go online and find your marae that way, and then you can start to connect there. So you're doing that bridging on both sides. So the more secure Māori are in their identity, especially back to landscape, that puts the tangata back into the whenua rather than tangata urban, the more likely those kids will succeed. And that's the next step that we're just actually designing now, is to follow through those kids and where they are today when we ask that question about 3 years' time. What careers have they gone into? How much have they connected back into their communities?
Because it seems that there's a lot they're up against a lot.
Oh God, yeah,
So-
TikTok.
and so much culture coming from overseas and negative stories in the media.
Interestingly, my own children as an example, they're very discerning now. They're actually seeing the chaff of the wheat. They now don't take everything for granted. I think 10 years ago, there was a lot of naivety around social media, but today the kids coming through social media, as much as they hate it, they also now are very careful with it. I mean, the girl's probably more trapped in a social media. I see this with my daughter, whereas my son's more into gaming and that, and he has.
Because the girls are more social. Or?
Yeah, and it's part of them having to fit in, and you know, I think from early teens they get locked into the whole likes and And my daughter must do a selfie about 40 times a day, and as soon as it's posted, it's gone again. And that's the thing. That's why you can't really track it unless you're. And she's influenced. She's 18, about to turn 18. And her older cousins do the same, and so she's learnt from them. You know, yeah, it's just they're kind of trapped in that space. But I think we're also right on the cusp of that reversing back out again. I have seen it with my daughter, her friends now. They're 18, about to go to university. They've started to widen out from that intensity they used to be in. So they go to parties together now. But I don't know. So yeah, we need to get back in and do some more surveying in the next 3 or 4 years, see where things are tracking. So many things happening at the moment, you know, like around AI and how that's an amazing tool used correctly. But also realization, anything you write as an academic and put out there into media land, digital media land, you never can pull it back. It's now going to be harvested and used in ways that will be dependent on our students actually being discerning again of understanding where the information source. So I'm not worried about AI. What we need to do is teach new skills to our students now on how to discern between AI hallucinating and AI that's come from direct sources. So, and ultimately, you still got to do the thinking. So,
what about I liked how you talked about the twins, not the twins, those raglan surfer guys, and how Pākehā can become really passionate and sort of contribute. And I'm just wondering about the Pākehā children and how they can kind of contribute.
The commonality, I guess, the Pākehā children's farming communities is that they've had an education as well, and they understand climate change and they understand ecology way better than their parents or grandparents. So they're actually pressuring the farming community back the other way. And you listen to Country Calendar now, I've listened to it for 20, 30 years, you know, on Radio New Zealand, before it was on TV. And you can see the shift has occurred already. You've got a new generation of farming coming through. They're not just into permaculture or organics, but are actually into giving back to the land they're on. And this is the commonality, is if you work the land and a part of the land cross-generationally, and you want it to stay in your control, you can't help but become part of the whenua. Since 1869, you've got 6 generations of Pākehā have become part of the whenua, and 6 generations of Māori removed from the whenua, but they both need each other. The commonality is the whenua, and the whenua is collapsing, the soil is losing its fertility, and its microbiome is deconstructing, and then we've got the incursion of pathogens, and with the climate warming up means that where the Māori used to sit here on the left, when native species thrived and survived and flourished, it's moving all the way towards a hotter, longer continuum to getting warmer and warmer. So these species over here on the left, as they go towards right, they start to really struggle. Many species that are coming from overseas, they're coming in and thriving because it's now a temperature they've come from the tropics. So we're now starting the introduction of, you know, mosquitoes that can act as vectors for white river virus, for example, or Zika or whatever. So we're actually moving in that direction, wetter, warmer climate. So you get a tipping point with our native species where they go as hard as they can to try and survive. Boom, sun and collapse, they're gone. and you've got these other species that have taken over. See this lake with all the algae, the algae blooms having now, they suffocate the lake. So all our native species are dying, and this algae bloom is now taking over. But it'll bring in with it other species will survive eating that algae, because ours haven't adapted. They've had hundreds of thousands of years living within a very stable mode or energy system that's now radically shifting.
Yeah.
Same thing if you look at the coral reefs, how quickly they're bleaching out and dying. I remember as mum and dad, one of the best things they ever did when we were kids was take us to Fiji and up there and been up in Saveso and up into a native village there, and just the profusion of colours of the corals everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, and same in Rotorua. We took our children there not too long ago, and that whole reef where it used to be just profusions of colour of all the corals, all bleached out white, and we only found one small amount of coral left that was still beautifully coloured, with hundreds of thousands of fish all around it, just that clinging to that, probably no bigger than this room. And we spent the rest of the day just snorkeling around and around and around all different fish and everything. And down at Makatu, same thing, where when we grew up, all the pipi that used to be there, but they were big edible pipi in good quality. And now those pipi down there, they're all tiny, but there's billions of them. But that's because the koro pipi, the old pipi, they're throwing out billions of sprats in the hope of survival, that any one of those will be able to survive as the mode shifts. So we'll probably go through a radical drop in that food source before it'll lift up again, if ever, under the changing conditions.
It feels like I have this thing that I think it might be helpful if everyone could just get together and cry. There's so much grieving to do.
Oh, there's, well, definitely need to have that shared space of shared understanding and empathy and I can't help it unless you're just totally psychopathic and no empathy at all, that everyone can understand a human story of loss and deprivation, and if it's cross-generational, how that's going to be so traumatic, and having to live with that trauma, like with you, at some point one of your ancestors made that choice to step out of that trauma so that her generations in the future can survive in the world. So in a way, it's like the shifting of the modi. They shift you out of that space there to one where you survive, but you can't carry that same cultural background, that baggage that came from here, because like the pipi, you just won't survive. The climate's changed too much. The water's too warm now. The salination's changed. Pathogens that are coming out of the water are impacting you. So you need to metamorphosize to something that will survive. And
I liked in your book how you really said that to heal the whenua, we need to heal tangata.
yeah,
And there does seem to be a hope in the fact that when people learn and they feel empathy for what's happened, we could come together more and
but it's the disconnection of urbanization rather than colonization per se, but that end result of colonization being these massive urban centers, concrete tar seal, that where in the cities now, especially the big cities that we visit, can you actually become part of the soil again. And my father-in-law used to talk about, when we talked about tangata whenua, his description was tangata being the people of the soil, not of the land.
Okay.
It's the soil that carries the essence to which we recycle in the planet, and it gives nutrition back. And the soil is inert until water from the skies creates the opportunity for fertility of the seeds that then can grow in it, and all the biome that goes with that, from the different microbes, fungi, bacterias, everything that the soil represents, and it's all in balance. That's modi, balance. And once you've got that balance, then you can grow what it's balanced to grow. So that's like, and the climate, the water, and we're part of it. We're not separate from it.
Yeah.
But at the moment, the healing of tangata is actually the healing of us understanding we are part of the system. If we don't make that shift to becoming part of the system, seeing we are literally, the world is our lifeboat, and we've got to stop shitting in our own nest and actually be a bit more smarter about that.
Yeah.
But we've got so much fractured societies across here, whether it's from the Gaza Strip through to what's happening in Sudan at the moment or in the Ukraine. Those human qualities of us and them, that's our tipping point crisis. If we don't get beyond that, we will take the planet down with us. So the next generation coming through is how this, I believe, will be healed. They've got to be bigger than our generations before us, and say, yeah, enough's enough. We actually want a future where we're going to be part of a planet that's going to be sustainable, and can cope with this climate change issue that's not going away. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, even if we do hit the 1.5, which we won't, of course. And they've got to get smart about this. Although, we will have one of those dystopian sci-fi stories occurring. People, could be oxygen drop. It could be just the Earth just starts to fail, sustaining mammalian life at least.
Yeah, it's like the original us and them was people and whenua. Yeah.
So celebrate difference, tolerate difference, be compassionate to difference. But to use difference in competition to access resources before they can, through exclusion and division, that's never going to end well. Even if you win, you lose. And this is what our Māori ancestors learnt from very early on, that winning the battle doesn't mean you win the war. You had to concede and give back, and that's what tuku is about, and utu. Utu is about balance. People say it's about payment, it's balance. Just like Māori.
Yeah, I guess being on an island, you have to survive on the island, so you can't destroy too much because it will destroy your well-being.
Yeah, and Māori were very good. Our ancestors were very good at experimentation and working out where the limits were. Sometimes they crossed them and extinctions occurred.
Yeah.
And they learnt from that.
Yeah.
Because if they didn't, they would have died.
Yeah.
So
we're at that point now again.
Yeah, and they learnt to maintain relationships as well. And that's where the elders come in with the wisdom of basically saying to those who are fighting, enough's enough. We're going to make peace here, and you're going to marry their daughter, whether you like it or not. And then the kids come from that. Yeah. Peace, harmony for about 2 generations, and then they start to go one way or the other. So marriage is actually probably one of the most important tools of any society in maintaining harmony. And
I guess you're a product of that.
Yeah, a little bit, I guess. Look at our whakapapa of violence, and you can see all the different marriages and how that overcame those. And it's same in Europe. It's just what happened there. But Europe worked out how to keep the wealthy and create their kingdoms and a system where you have servitude and barons and lords. And the only way you could go from a serf culture into being part of this, my son talks about it. Of course, these people are leather people. They worked the leather, they were the blacksmiths, and they tilled the land and everything, and they were the salt of the earth. Yeah. And then over here you got the aristocracy and the lords, the landlords, and he calls them the diamonds.
Okay.
And the only way you could come from here to here was through knighthood, through chivalry, through the ability to talk their language. But you'll always be tolerated, but you're never one of them. But at the same time, then you were their knight. But you had to balance that, because if you were too much over there, then they'd disown you. Yes, it was quite interesting. So Europe is based around those
maintaining that sort of hierarchy.
Yeah, but at the same time, the aristocracy in Europe, they didn't give back to the people. The people wouldn't support them during their war. So you couldn't do the Sheriff of Nottingham situation. Otherwise, they won't go to war with you, even if you try and kill them. It's just like they'll turn on you. So there was a quid pro quo. Rangatira-tanga in this country was based around the rangatira. As long as they've seen to be in service of the people, generally, the people would fight with them and follow them. But if they were seen to be self-serving, people just stood back and went, no, you're on your own, brother.
Yeah. I think, what's the time? Oh, I'm late.
Okay.
Can I ask my final question?
Of course.
If you imagine that you're 80 years old.
Oh, that's not far away.
And you're sitting maybe here.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, geez, why did I build this place?
Maybe you're surrounded by all your whānau and the people you love, and you look back at your life. What do you feel most proud of?
Oh, God. That's a really tough question without preparation. I don't know. I think that I've never shied away from a challenge. And when anyone says something's too difficult, I'm going to give it a crack. Yeah. And probably end up dying doing that. But to me, that's really important, not to shy away. Maybe that's my sporting background. Find the courage to excel, to go beyond what you can. And sometimes you come a cropper, but I think it's worth the risk. And life is finite anyway. So while you can, do. And as my dad's older brother used to say, whatever you do, do it. You might love for it or hate it for it, but they'll never forget you.
Awesome, yeah.
So I don't know if that quite answers that, but I'd like to think that those who come after our generation and further would have cracked the code around climate change. We would have evolved to a species as in humanity that's learnt to balance with the rest of the planet. I fear that a lot of what we've grown up with won't exist in the future, but there'll be new opportunities for new things to occur as well. So that's for them. That's their problem. I feel sorry that we have all been captured in the colonisation process and it's brought the planet to where it is today. And if we could do it over again, how would we do it over again? And if the treaty had been to Te Reti in its promise and had been fulfilled, this country would be an amazing country and would have it'd be way ahead of where it is today. And
maybe we could be an amazing country.
I hope. Well, hope for the best, expect the worst, but I remain optimistic that our children are really smart, that they will, all we can do is lay the foundation. Remember, half the cost of this house was in the foundation.
Really?
Yeah, and then everything else on top gives it the form and and the pronouncement of a whakapapa on this landscape. That's where the real work is done, is in what you can't see, what's at ground level. Yeah. So hopefully
So maybe when you're 80, you can feel proud of being part of the foundation.
I hope. Oh, that'd be lovely to check.
Thank you. That was the Good Energy Project. If you'd like to access more interviews, writing and illustrations, you can find them at thegoodenergyproject.substack.com. The shows are also available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.